Hi, I'm Kristine Madera, and I'm the author of the novel God and Drag, and I am here with Henry Sullivan, who is the author of Colosseum. And we get together every other Friday and talk about the things that are really interesting to us, and we hope you find some interest in that as well. So this week's topic is about ideology and being faithful to the tribe, and probably a little bit wider ranging than that as well, but really how ideology can become a substitute for reality and why that is not really a great thing. So, but we've both been writing about this a little bit. So I have an article that came out today, and Henry had one that came out earlier this week, and there are different takes on ideology and thought. So I'm going to ask you, Henry, what is it that drove you to want to write about ideology, and what is the most pressing aspect of that for you?
Well, the thing that drove me to write the article that I published early this week was actually, I listened to a lot of podcasts and, an economist was talking about different economic systems and so on. And he sort of made this comment that seems to be conventional wisdom forever, which is, the way he said it, I'm going to try and do justice to the way he said it. He said, Americans have never been as sympathetic to socialism as Europeans have been. And even that
Mm-hmm.
very careful statement suggests that most Americans even think about economic systems. And so, and that's what I was responding to. I was responding to the idea that the American public, generally speaking, cares about one economic system versus the other. Other people will literally say, well, Americans prefer capitalism, and it's just like, no, they don't. It's like Americans don't prefer capitalism. That's
Right.
ridiculous. Americans, generally speaking, are focused on the outcomes of the economic system. They don't really care how those outcomes are achieved. And I started off by asking a question or by quoting a question that was part of a study that was earlier this century, which had to do with the fact that it showed that there are plenty of Americans who actually do participate in government programs that you could easily make the
Mm-hmm.
case are based on socialistic idea or some form of socialism, but they don't believe that they're participating in government programs.
Right,
Yeah,
like all those people that used to say, "I don't believe in universal health care, but don't take away my Medicare."
exactly,
Or,
exactly.
or
That's
"I
a
don't believe in
great example.
socialism, but don't touch my Social Security,"
That's
without
exactly
understanding that
right.
that's exactly what it is.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I mean, to give her credit, the woman who conducted the study, what she was arguing is that since Americans don't know about the programs that they participate in, it makes them hostile to the idea of social assistance and all this kind of stuff. I completely disagree with her, by the way. But I went on to make the point that the reason why I'm convinced that generally speaking, Americans don't care about one social system, economic system or another, is because those words are just labels for most people. And I intentionally
Mhm.
gave the contrast example of a bunch of words that are labels for me, which are a bunch of words
Mhm.
which are very common in sports, and
Mhm.
my point was, it's not that these words are a different language, they're English, and so in both cases, we can read the words. Most Americans know the word capitalism, socialism, constitution, democracy, autocracy. They know those words when they see them. My point is they have as much meaning for most people as the list of words that I presented, which are all from sports. And for me, the reason I don't really know much about those words are just labels for me is because I don't care about sports. So why would the words mean anything?
Right, right.
And
Yeah.
I think, and I really do believe that that's the situation that a lot of Americans in, or they really don't care about these things. And so the words literally don't mean anything to them. As a matter of fact, I was just watching a video from a podcast earlier today. And this woman was saying she's been in politics for 20 years, I think. And she was saying, Americans don't have ideologies, they have problems. And that's another way of saying exactly the same thing, which is people
Yeah.
don't really think about the ideology. What they think about is what's bothering them at the moment, and she even kind of ended it with, and they want to think about this stuff as little as possible, which I also think is true.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
And so that was the point. That was the point of my article, you know.
All right. Well, and I do think I differ with you a little bit in that I think that we have been conditioned to think that capitalism is always until fairly recently, like the capitalism is like the only system that works for us, that is something we can rely on, it's something we've built everything on, it's very American, blah 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 blah, and that we have a lot of baggage around socialism, communism, and some other things, and throwbacks to other times. Socialism and communism are kind of throwbacks to the Soviets and things like that. So most people, when they think about a socialist system, are thinking about the government over control and controlling the markets and all of these kinds of things that did not turn out all that well. And so that's sort of part of our historical memory. And we don't really have we have models of socialism that people like democratic socialism. So like the European style socialism or Scandinavian style socialism, where you've got functioning economies that are basically capitalist economies, but a very wide social net. And so now, that term's been used as like, what do they call it? Democratic socialists. And now that's being vilified as, all kinds of stuff. So I think we just follow we're conditioned for the ideology of capitalism, and we haven't quite given that up, and we haven't quite warmed to other ideological ideas. But you're correct that they are all about solving problems, because if you look at our society, we have a lot of social programs, although they are diminishing in many ways. But when I was talking about ideology, so for me, I was framing it, there's a couple of layers of ideology for me. So you're back in the no light again, just so you know.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to solve that
A
problem.
little better light. Okay, that's better. Now I can see your pretty face. Okay, so for me, look, we had talked before about the inner landscape. And part of the inner landscape that everybody has is their mental models of the world. And a lot of that is built on what was going on growing up, like the model that they grew up in, and then ways that model was enforced or challenged as they grew up, and then ways that they either thought about it or didn't think about it. Some people just continue to live that model, and some people, challenge their model and create other ideas, and how those become our reality set points. And that we keep approaching reality from these particular orientations until we challenge them or change them. So that's one level of ideology or mental models or reality that gets perpetuated, or that we hold in place in our minds, and we try to get everything to fit into that. And then ideology is another layer on top of that. So it can be economic ideology, it can be political ideology, it can be religious ideology, but something where an idea or a thought system or a dogma system kind of creates your view of the world in a even smaller slice of the world. Because there's the whole world, there's our mental model of the world, and then there's ideologies that sit on top of that. And some of the big problems with those kinds of ideologies, like, capitalism, communism, socialism, various religions, all of these different things, is that they have an idea of how the world should work. You've got like Reaganomics. You've got these things where they have these thought processes about how they think the world or the economy should work. They develop structures to reinforce that view. And then they pretend that is reality, even when, like, say, Reaganomics and things like that have obviously never worked. But we keep going back to that same ideology as if it was the truth, as if it was reality. And when it becomes a substitute for reality itself, then we're kind of off in this kind of crazy little micro world that makes no sense and that doesn't have any connection with anybody else's micro world. And that's kind of where we are in a lot of ways right now, is that different groups of people are creating these different micro realities and trying to pass them off as reality. And if you're caught up in one of those, then you kind of adopt that as your own sense of reality, and it becomes this self-referencing idea that you continue to come back to. And I'll use the word religion, because I know that's one big thing, theme in my family, that when you use religion or your particular religion to demonstrate the truth of your religion, that's just a self-referencing idea, referencing back to that idea, versus looking at a larger exploration about, what your idea means. So when I was looking at it in terms of reality, that's kind of the way I was approaching it.
Okay, so in your article, you talked about domination machines.
Yeah. Yeah. So right now I did that in terms of like all the major, and I brought it down to capitalism, socialism, and communism, kind of the big economic things. They could
Mhm.
also be democracy versus, whatever might be out there. But the game on all of these, as they have been played, is basically different iterations of the domination game. They are all ways to dominate and control from the top down, with a small group of people doing the control and reaping most of the benefits, and the large group of people, kind of being at the mercy of this ideological or alternate reality system. So if you read any of my articles, I come back to the domination game a lot, because that right now, to me, if we can break the hold of the domination game, we can reimagine how we operate. If we just change the label of the domination game, we're just doing the same thing over and over and over again with a new label. So yeah, that was kind of the point of that article.
Well, it's interesting you say that because actually a lot of people feel the way you do, and that's exactly why you have Tucker Carlson saying that he's thinking about starting a third party.
Don't lump me with Tucker Carlson.
Well, I mean,
But no, I
but
understand.
he
And like
sees
you had said, yeah. And
he
like you had
sees.
said before, all right, I'm gonna just finish this thought and then you can come in. Like you had said before, sometimes it takes lots of people that find a common, I guess, thing that they want, or a common idea, even if they're coming at it from different ways, to actually begin to create that change. So while I wouldn't want to be connected with Tucker in any sort of way, I can understand the wanting to change the system. So okay, I defer to you now.
Well, actually, I think what he's doing is he sees that a lot of people feel like have the sentiment that you just expressed, which is a lot of people want the people in power to no longer be in power. And
What do they want to
it's
replace?
what's that?
But what do they want to replace it with? Because
Well,
that's
we'll see
always
that.
the thing. If you replace one power with another power without changing that underlying system of like power over versus, distributed power, you just have the same thing. I mean, it's just, I'm going to put my system in charge, and I think my system would be great. But I don't think that I should be able to dominate everybody else's world. So that's the other half of that I think is the challenge, because until we break down that idea that we need to impose a system on people and have this domination thing, we're not going to escape that just because we don't like the particular people who are in charge now, from whatever viewpoint you are looking at that.
Well, I do agree that there are some movements are all about imposing your group's preferences on other people.
Hmm.
But to the question that you asked, though, what do you want to replace it with? There is no general consensus in terms of what people want to replace the current regime with. There's a lot of people are circling around, essentially going back to the New Deal. They're saying things that sound pretty similar, but all
Hmm.
of the focus is actually on removing what's there. So it's all, and that's easier actually. I mean, that's one thing our current moment shows, is that tearing things down is a lot easier than building things up. And so there's a general consensus that the extreme preference that we have toward billionaires has to be torn down. And so a lot of people are shouting, tear it down, from different coming from different points of view. And there's a similar consensus that people want to remove the U.S. military presence from the Middle East. So a lot
Hmm.
of people are shouting the same thing. They're doing it from different points of view.
Right.
And so more than likely, and like I said, I mean, tearing things down is easier than building things up. So the chances are pretty good that some form of those two things is going to happen. The problem is like what comes after that. There are people thinking about it and talking about it. As a matter of fact,
Yeah.
I've been struck this week in particular that people who are very focused on civil society and, common good and prosperity have been much more optimistic than
Hmm.
they have in the past, up to this point. And the people who are being very, very pessimistic are people who focus on markets. So the people who focus on markets are just like, what the hell is going on with the with the 30-year yield?
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
what does Besant think he's doing? Is he crazy?
Right. And if that's your
those people are
only
freaking
lens,
out.
yeah, and I think it's either Ernesto Substack, or I can't pull off the top of my head, that was talking about having a conversation, because he's a finance person and was having a conversation with the value of like nature with somebody else who was a finance person who had no conception of how to understand the value of something like natural land, like a natural forest, without
That's
being
right.
able to monetize it somehow. It kind of goes back
That's
to that
exactly
saying like
right.
the state, but like if
Yes.
there's no like return on it, it has no value.
That's right.
And I think that is, when you look at the world from that purely economic viewpoint and financialized viewpoint, there is, it's a lot of bad news. But if you look at a lot of the things that are happening where nature is getting rights, I mean, gosh, that's a pretty big one. And in not here, but in other places, there is a lot of things coming up that do offer hope. But the big question is what comes next. And when I was writing about that in this week's article, I talked about how we have the opportunity to do something completely new. We don't have to fall back on old models. We can use different aspects of different models, but that we have things like we can all talk to each other now, because we've got, sometimes it gets shut down, but we have ways for people to organize, to talk with each other, to participate in decision making, not even just locally or regionally or nationally, but internationally. And so, those are some of the things that can come online and become more of the foundation of new systems if we're able to use that technology wisely, and including like AI. We can use it for what we're using it now, domination and porn, or we can use it to help solve problems and help create, structures and networks that help to support organizing on the people level to be able to create new kinds of systems that are more supportive of everybody and our relationship with nature and that kind of things, rather than, who's winning the market game today. But that is the big question.
Well, I mean, to your point about, like, again, going back to your article, to your point about Matisse, the kind of knowledge that you can't actually quantify, stuff that people, it's kind of an organic sort of knowledge, interpersonal
Yeah.
knowledge. Well, there are a lot of this, I've witnessed a lot of discussions about that. And they're specifically talking about what people are learning from the Minnesota example, because, of course, because of all of the things that happened in Minnesota around the time that Renee Good and Alex Preddy were murdered, people have gone there and talked to people, and what they're coming away with is, one, the people there are saying, look, we had these structures, these social connections before ICE came here this year. So that was already there. We've had this for a couple of years for a number of reasons. And so you don't want to wait until you have a catastrophe, or you're dealing with something like ICE snatching people off of your streets before you start organizing in that. And they also made the point that some of it may not even seem like, some of the organization that you already have may not even seem like it's useful in that situation. But a lot of time, like, one of the things that they used is they had like just these networks of people who were built around getting their kids to soccer practice.
Right.
And then that's it. I mean, that's what they used the network for. And that was the same network that they used to bring food to people who were afraid to leave their houses because they were afraid of being snatched off the street by ICE. And so, I mean, they were really explaining that, one, you may actually already have the networks in place, and you have to, what's important is to recognize their usefulness in emergency situations. But two, you probably want to think imaginatively about some of the other things you're going to need, organizational, structurally, institutionally, to sort of confront the problems that you're probably going to face. And so those discussions are already happening. The thing that I'm glad you mentioned AI, because you're right. The preference for AI is kind of all on the side of a bunch of things unrelated to this. Some of the same groups are very, very, very skeptical of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, because we're using it in crazy ways. Let's just set it
Well,
free and see what it can do versus, what do we want to use it for and use it
well, I mean,
responsibly and not that it doesn't have to necessarily be about a $2 trillion, IPO.
well, but I guess this kind of goes to, people seem to know that the companies that are pushing AI were basically selling the idea that they were going to eliminate jobs. People
Hmm.
seem to know that.
Yeah.
As much as people don't pay attention to the news, they seem to know that. And then on top of that, like we hear about the opposition to data centers, but I've only seen one video where they showed what a data center is actually like. They turned on the camera and they were
Hmm.
like, and they had to yell into the microphone, "This is what it's like to live near a data center." Those things are
Wow. Yeah.
extremely loud.
Yeah.
So it's not like we're not like, I mean, just the construction of it is very noticeable, is very invasive, is very disruptive. And the reason why it seems is bipartisan, it seems to me, is like, again, this same video, I'm pretty sure they showed like the people who are opposed to it and like where they live. And so
Hmm.
like there was this one guy, could have easily been a Trump supporter, but this guy was sitting on his porch and he kind of waved his hand at like this huge field and he was just like, they want to tear all this down. And like it's just the idea of all of this land and greenery that's there now, and basically what the people who live there are faced with is
Yeah.
all of that being torn down. Then you can understand how all of a sudden it doesn't really matter who your political who you prefer in office. It's like, wait a second, no, you're not going to tear all that stuff down. And I think those two things, just the physicality of data centers, and then the fact that they never said anything that would be appealing to most people about
Correct.
AI. you
Yeah,
know,
because in the build up to all of this, part of the conversation was, yeah, people will get this benefit that we won't need as many people, to fill jobs, so we can all work a lot fewer hours, as if, we might still have jobs. We just get a time benefit. Maybe we only work 20 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week and we can still live. But there's no, as they move forward, of course, that's not part of the conversation. That conversation is all about stock price and IPO and who wins that game, and everybody else is just kind of on their own and that kind of stuff. So, again, this could be used, and the data centers are a big deal. And I think, there's some things that could have been done around data centers, like the people building them needed to create their own power sources to do that, whether it's micronuclear or, other kinds of things, so that it doesn't pull from the power grid for everybody else. They have to figure out their own water situation without pulling the water from everybody else. Or they have to, if they see, oh, look, this is going to cause all these problems, we need to be able to do this in a different sort of way, to be able to create different technology to create the data centers. Like in a slow walk, you have time to do those things. But it has not become, it has become back to that same old model. So from a model of AI being able to really make our lives better, to a model of AI following the same domination financial game of trying to win the race and, to hell with the consequences. So that's the difference between, the domination game aspect of needing to do this for the money, needing to do this for the power, needing to do this to keep our country, superior to other countries, and we're slipping in that one with AI. It seems like, but that it's not, that the AI story is not about us. The AI story is about, the winners of the AI game versus helping humanity, which is where the AI people all started that conversation, from Elon Musk to Sam Altman and everybody else. It was always about, we're creating this for humanity. But then it turns into, no, we're creating this for our own benefit. Screw humanity.
well, it's funny you say created it. That's what they said, because that's not what people heard. Um, I mean, I don't,
That's
I
not what their
haven't.
actions said. I mean, they said it. People might have heard it, but none of their actions ever aligned with that. So that's why there was a promise that was not kept from the very beginning, but that was the talking point. And you're right.
Well,
People
actually,
didn't believe it because their actions didn't match their words.
actually, it seems as though that's not what people heard. People heard we're going to eliminate jobs. That's what people heard, and they
Yeah, they
heard.
heard that too. Yeah.
And like when you say there's an assumption that, I mean, I've been really kind of surprised by how many people are saying what do they need all of the data centers for? And
Hmm.
people are connecting it to flock cameras because they're thinking they don't need this for books to digitize books. You know, that you
No,
don't
and
need that much. You don't
yeah,
need that much compute power for that. What you need compute power for is surveillance.
yeah,
You know?
absolutely.
And so,
And that's
I mean, it just seems as though people, generally speaking, seem to have gotten nothing but negative messages
mhm.
from this whole, build out. And so I mean, in a way, that's kind of good news that, like, not only are they waking up, they were never fooled to begin with, it seems to me, which is pretty cool.
No,
But I guess to your point, so it sounds like what you're advocating, at least in your article, is you're advocating something similar to what the lessons that people are getting from Minnesota, which is, we need to use the technologies that we have to basically optimize the on the ground, social structure that we already have, to make it more efficient, to use it to defend ourselves, to use it to build, like a social movement and stuff like that. And it seems as though people are getting that message for sure. Now, I got the impression in the article though that you're kind of arguing against representative government. And so, because you said, and I get it. I mean, a lot of my stuff basically assumes that politicians are bad. So
well,
so
it's
I
the
can I mean,
same
that's just
thing.
the way it sounded throughout,
Well,
that your view of politicians is actually generally pretty negative.
my view, because politics is still right now the domination game. It's they're all in people's different people's pockets. They're not really representing us. They're representing an ideology, or they're representing whoever gives them the most money, or whatever that happens to be. But they're not really representing the people, and it doesn't really matter who's in control. That's what that is. Because I remember, so I've been like every political party. I was raised Republican. I switched to Democrat when Clinton was in, and I stayed that way through part of the Obama administration. And then I left, and I left because there was a vote that came up and this was the Democrats were entirely in charge, and it was, I can't remember the name of the bill, but it was basically one of those, what is it? The package that was passed after 9/11 that was basically took us from non-surveillance society to surveillance society, and on like out in the open. And I thought, and so many Democrats were against it at that time. And yet when it came time to re-up it, they all voted for it, or many of them voted for it. And I thought, okay, y'all are the same. Like, it's all still about consolidating that power. It is not about representing people. It is about preserving, the bureaucracy. So that's what part of what that is that it doesn't really represent us. I think we have other options now because, our particular representative democracy came to being when everything traveled by horse. So then we went from horse to, railroad to telegram to now we have digital stuff. So we can participate in real time in mass in ways that we couldn't before. So I'm just thinking that needs a rethink about how we do that. And to your point about using technology to be like something that we do for organizing, that's one step in it. But the way that me and my vision works on this thing, I still kind of go back to that YA series that I'm still developing in my head, and the world that I have there, which is a world of distributed networks where you use the technology that we have now, like, the internet style technology, not our current internet, because that's a mess, but internet style technology, cell style technology, network style technology, to do a form of self-governance where you've got different groups of people who are working on different projects within that. So you've got support in specific projects. So somebody with knowledge and wisdom of, say, soil and soil structures and fungi under certain conditions could talk with somebody else around the world about those same kinds of things and compare notes and see how things work from place to place, and have that kind of distributed knowledge, but also where people are much more participatory on an individual level to the meta decisions that are made both locally, regionally, and national, like internationally, because nationally is not quite, doesn't quite work the same. So I see all of this stuff being built, as things that right now are being used for the domination game, that really, if the algorithm changed, if our way of utilizing those things changed, we could do amazing things in terms of creating more, self-governance and equality and equity and that kind of stuff. So I just see it's all being built, and it doesn't necessarily have to remain being used for the same things it's being used for.
Okay. Okay. I mean,
I don't
I,
know. This is my fantasy world, right? I get to choose my own fantasy. And it is not like, an ideology, because I recognize that the world doesn't work that way, but it is sort of a vision that I'm holding about what could be possible if we move forward in a way where, we, to your point, unite as people in smaller social networks and begin to create that change on larger and larger scales.
mhm. Well, I mean, I think that there's a potential for quite a bit more social disruption as the specific technology where, where translations can happen in real time. So, I watch videos, a lot of videos from Indonesia actually,
Mm-hmm.
but also from Portugal. There's a television station that that post their videos on YouTube, and some of the videos that they post are auto dubbed. And sometimes I'll watch it because I'm really just curious about what the person's saying. But a lot of times I'll just have the volume off because auto dub can be a little bit disconcerting. Like when the voice that's chosen doesn't seem to match the person who's speaking. It's kind of irritating in a way, unless you really just want to know what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And, last week, as a matter of fact, there's one woman who's in Indonesia. She has a channel that's pretty popular. I think it has like 240,000 subscribers. And so I decided to turn the volume on and see what the auto dub. And it just so happened that they picked a voice that matches her voice. And now I actually thought, because the technology is available now, where I could be speaking English
Mm-hmm.
to a person who only understands Arabic,
Mm-hmm.
but on their end, they'll hear Arabic
Mm-hmm.
in my voice in real
Yeah.
time, and on
Yeah.
my end, I'll hear, English in their voice in real time. That technology does exist. And so I thought that
Wow.
maybe
Yeah.
YouTube was using a version of that technology, for this auto dub. But then I've watched subsequent videos that are auto dubbed, and it just happened that that particular voice matched her real voice, because I've heard her voice in her language, but I don't
Yeah.
understand what she's saying,
Yeah.
And so I think once they get that technology down and people are able to have, because I mean, since COVID, we've had sort of an explosion of shows like this where people just kind of talk.
Mm-hmm.
And you're in one state, I'm in another state, and so on. And you could even do it as long as you're speaking the same language. In English, I would assume, is probably the main one where this happens,
Yeah.
where people might be in, like, Turkey, but the person in Turkey is actually speaking English.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, another person might be in Germany and another person's in the UK or whatever, and one person's in the US. But they're all speaking English, though. If they can make it where they use that technology where you're saying what you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
and it's your voice, but it's being translated into the language that the person on the other end understands
Mm-hmm.
in your voice in real time. And it's amazing when you do that, because I've seen videos about this technology. You don't pay nearly as much attention to the person's mouth,
Mm-hmm.
but for the fact that it's their voice clearly, because it matches their face, and, and their mouth is moving.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be enough. And, I can imagine the disruption that would happen all around the world once if that technology were allowed to kind of create communication among people. Because, sometimes, like when I listen to these auto dub, if I can get past the voice itself, it's sort of fascinating what the person's actually saying. It's like, we sort of have a tendency to project our assumptions of what they're saying onto them, and then once you understand what they're actually saying, you're just like, oh, well, that actually fits her body language. It fits the fact that she's there. You get a much more like all of a sudden you're able to sort of put that understanding of her actual words into context of everything else that you're looking at. And it just creates a whole nother picture that you didn't have before. And
Yeah.
I think that would be an interesting, in fact, when I thought the technology, I thought Riverside actually had that type of technology. And I was going to send an email to this woman in Brazil who has the same sort of thing and I've
Mhm.
actually been to Brazil. So
Yeah.
I thought that would help a little bit. But it is interesting how people are trying to expand their projection to the world by
Mhm.
actually speaking, even though they know that like most, a big chunk of their audience doesn't actually understand their language.
Yeah.
They're speaking to the world anyway. And so it's fascinating. I think if we could get to that point, that would create some interesting
Yeah.
disruption, this
Well,
cultural
yeah.
disruption.
Being able to connect with one another. One of the things I think that we would also need to create that kind of disruption is, so I think it was Descartes said, or Descartes, or however you say his name, said that, every once in a while you ought to just throw out everything, all of your preconceived notions and start fresh by building sort of a new conception of the world and of you and of your place in the world and all that. And I think that's one thing that would be beneficial because everybody's against things. And we've kind of unified about being against whether it's data centers and AI and all that kind of stuff. But having a positive, affirming movement forward that was kind of structurally open to be interpreted for different people and at different times, but kind of working toward, like, mine was always, in that series was always personal and collective well-being. What are we, and collective also meaning nature and everything else, not just human well-being, but personal and, all of our collective well-being. And if you begin to look at policies and look at things from that perspective, does it help the personal's well-being? Does it help support our common well-being? Then that's a direction that we move towards. So, we need more than a direction away from things. We need a direction to things. And if there are certain unifying ideas that begin to proliferate among people, that we begin to use these technologies to make affirmative movement toward. And there's a lot of places doing affirmative movement, again, like that. uh, Letting trees and rivers and nature be have rights, and how do you ensure those rights, and who actually speaks for those things? That's a whole other thing. But like, those details kind of get worked out in different places in different ways. But having some form of forward motion, I think, is important, because the nervous system gets really revved up when we get against something, right? And it narrows our thinking. It drives that cortisol. It is a limited movement because, one, it burns your body out. It burns you out. You always need new people, because people just come and go with that, because they just can't sustain that kind of level of self-induced stress. But when you have something to move toward, that becomes self-feeding. So something that is beneficial, moving us forward, is kind of a, like there's that whole idea. This was one that grew up, that has taken a lot of hold, as the pay it forward.
Mhm.
In the beginning, like, that was a whole big paradigm shift, that, like, you help somebody without expecting something in return, but then, that person goes and helps somebody else, and if we all just pay it forward, people get what they need when they need it. And, like, if you're paying for this woman's groceries because she doesn't have enough money, and then somebody else, pays for something for you, or does something else for you, that you just kind of keep paying it forward, and that's how we take care of each other. And that was a real paradigm shift. And so that kind of affirmative forward motion taken to a larger network that begins to drive our decisions and our connections and our policies and how we treat one another, I think, can make a huge difference in how we use the technologies that are emerging, that should be available to us, even if the companies that have developed those technologies aren't necessarily the ones who maintain control over them.
Well, I mean, I understand what you're saying about paying it forward. And I think there is, I mean, what you're saying, that reminds me of studies that I've heard summaries of, where they say that, you might think that wealthy people give more than people who
Mm.
sort of struggle from paycheck to paycheck. But actually, I guess you're smiling because the
Yeah,
opposite is
it's
actually
not.
true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that the opposite is actually true. I guess and I think that what you were saying about people who think about particular problems, like you mentioned a couple of times climate change,
Hmm.
and this could, I mean, so at this point, you can be in a privileged position where your employment is based on trying to solve the climate crisis, and it's possible for you to your employer, whoever that person is, to send you to conferences around the world and all this kind of stuff. But you're right that there are plenty of people who were just concerned about weather patterns and so on and so forth. And if you create an opportunity for them to talk across borders, then that's one more thing that people would do. I agree with that. Although I have a funny feeling that the technology that I mentioned earlier, what it would probably foster is a whole lot of mundane conversation, like, "Oh, you really like the color blue? Yeah, me too." I think
Yeah,
it's
maybe
like,
so.
and I really like this kind of shoes, and
Well, you're going to get that too, I imagine. And there are a lot of people who are doing basically like just personal motivation based research. So people who love clouds, people who like to watch weather patterns, people who like to watch different things. And there was one it's a story that a lot of people who were doing their own weather watching were reporting to these different weather stations so they could, and this was just people doing it on their own time because they like to do it. People who like astronomy, they find planets and comets and different things all the time. Like,
right.
people do this for fun and then they have their communities and they talk and stuff like that. But I remember this
Mhm.
one story, and it's been a long time, so I can't remember the full details. But it was one of those things where there was a lot of people, particularly in rural areas, who were weather watchers. They liked to watch it. They would talk about the different storms and what was coming, what was happening on the ground, and that was being fed into whether it was a National Weather Service or another kind of public access weather service that was creating much better weather mapping than they could just do with the weather balloons and things like that. And it was all a public project. And then they were going to privatize, like there was a company that wanted to come in and then become the paid, probably AccuWeather, but because that's got some interesting history there, but wanted to come in and then monopolize the data and charge people for the data. And all of a sudden, those people who really loved weather, and they were like, no, I'm not doing this for a closed for-profit company. I will do this for public access. And so, there was a kickback and there was more public access with that. But I think there are a lot of people who do all kinds of things for their own fun and amusement that are working together in different ways to figure out solutions for things that maybe don't get scaled because they don't have access to resources and that kind of stuff to scale it up to solve larger problems. But I think that is one way that, the AI that we have or the other tools that we have can be useful to unite different kinds of groups of people so that they can work across larger networks than they might have in the past.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, no, I totally agree. I totally agree. I guess the question is what's the likelihood that that would happen while so much of the infrastructure is privately owned? So I guess that's the question.
Well, that is a question, and that's sort of still comes back to that domination game, and you never know, like, what domino might fall that cause things to change.
Hmm.
Where, maybe the internet does finally eat itself out all the way up and crash. And so then what are our options at that point? Because then a lot of these private things become useless and you'd have to go to mesh networks and other kinds of things to be able to connect. And then if you've got enough time doing that, you build those kinds of networks to be able to put into place the connections that something like the internet, which is slowly eating itself alive, can no longer do. And so we might end up getting a new kind of internet under a new set of rules that allows a different kind of playing field.
Possible. We'll see.
In my fantasy world, this is how we get there.
Right, right, right.
So I know that a lot of what I look at seems pie in the sky. But I've always been able to, or interested in looking what's possible, because it feels much better to me than trying to look at what is not working and, move down that road to dystopia. So I'm much more of a protopian person to see, well, what is working and how can it work better, versus what's not working and how can I write about an apocalyptic world.
Hmm. Well, like I said, I mean, this week at least, I have noticed that people who think a whole lot about, these sorts of things are generally optimistic. I'm not really sure why, but they are.
Well, they have good solutions too. They have really good, I can't keep up. And this has been a really tough couple of weeks to be able to read other people's Substack. So I apologize out there. I can get to maybe one a day, but it's just the amount of good thinking, of good systems work, and of people actually putting, teeth behind those systems is rising, and there's a lot of movement that direction. So it's been amazing to see how things are beginning to coalesce and come together. And it's still, I was watching this thing on retirement income stuff, and they talk about how, you're saving for 10 years, and you've got your little micro movements on that, and then all of a sudden you hit this critical mass where things are multiplying. And I think we're still in that place where things are multiplying very small, and then at some point they begin to come into scale, and we begin to see a lot more change and possibility than we might recognize as what's happening now.
Well, I actually think that what you just said probably is the reason why these people who have been warning up to now are starting to sound so much more positive, because again, they are talking about specific instances that they've either run across, or somebody sent them a message, and, or they've had a conversation. Because some of these people, they actually have these little micro conversations with groups in different parts of the country and so on. And maybe that's the thing that's making them feel much more positive, is that, they're actually seeing more of the fruits of their labor, where more, they're seeing these groups of people who have been, either meeting for dinner on Sundays twice a month and talking about this or planning that. And, and so maybe they're starting to feel like, okay, so people are organizing, and they're not waiting for, the midterms or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not waiting for a particular politician, to save them, or somebody in the Justice Department or whatever. And so that's good. Again, it is striking that is happening at the very same time where the people who only follow markets are freaking out. So it's
It is. Well, there's that model, and again, don't ask me what the name of the model is, but as this system begins to go down and this system rises, there's that turning point in between. So we're really witnessing, the system as it is cracking, and all of, everybody trying to hold on to it is cracking as it crumbles. And the other one is still in that rising. So I don't think we've hit that crossover yet, but we will hit that crossover at some point where the old style systems just aren't working anymore, and they're become unreliable. Even think of the power grid. The power grid under data centers is, I imagine, becoming pretty precarious, and that you need a different way of coordinating power and generating power, and maybe it's microgrids versus giant grids, to be able to sustain, electricity. And so as those giant grids with their control systems are crumbling, other systems are hopefully coming online that will begin to shift over to as we can. And hopefully there's not too much of a disruption in between those.
Well, in addition to the loud concrete behemoths that they want to build atomic, nuclear power plants next to them to power them.
Yeah, micronuclear is a big conversation. I don't know enough about it. The nuclear thing always kind of freaks me out a little bit. So I don't know about micronuclear. There are other ways to It seems like there should be all kinds of other ways to generate electricity if you don't get caught up into, like, if we had a timeline that in 10 years there would be no more oil. If we imagine that timeline and really focused on what are the other ways that we can power things, whether it's renewables or much more creative things or fission or whatever it happens to be, there's just so much that is caught up in, no, we have to hold on to this old system because we all rely on it, and not enough on what's actually new and possible and reliable that might just completely overtake an old system. And then we could use gas and oil for other things, but we don't have to necessarily power the planet with it.
Well, the U.S. is the only we that's clinging to that system. Everybody else, especially since the war, has basically said, okay, I'm done with this. And so like India just recently implemented an order where, those tuk-tuks,
Yeah.
I forget exactly what the rule is. It's like any vehicle with more than 3 wheels or something like that has to be electric.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, India, if you think about it, India. But I think part of it is, since they share a border with China, there are a whole bunch of people on the close to the China side who kind of got tired of losing power and all that kind of stuff. And so they literally just went over the border, bought solar panels, brought them back to their houses, And so there's like all these solar panels in that part of India, and people now have power, sustainable power. So
Good. Yeah.
So it seems as though this, the rest of the world has basically gotten tired of this nonsense of this dependency on a commodity that causes so much disruption in the world.
Yeah.
And so it seems as though everybody else is moving on, but it's funny because Trump is meeting Xi Jinping in September. And it would not surprise me at all if after that meeting, we basically opened the United States to Chinese EVs.
You think?
That would not surprise me at all. And it would be fascinating to see the drill baby drill people, dealing with all of these, because I don't know if you've seen any videos of the new crop of Chinese electric vehicles.
God, they're amazing. Yes.
They're amazing. Like, in other words, it's not about the fact that they're EVs. It's the fact that they're really nice cars. So
yeah. Well, and I think because I've been watching that, and because one of the limitations of these things are the rare earth minerals. But somebody, I think it was the Japanese, but don't quote me on that, came up with an alternate way of running, the renewables, the batteries, all the stuff that rely on the rare earth minerals with things that were that didn't need to be mined from asteroids, and didn't disrupt the land to be mined. And it was a technology I couldn't really get it, but it was something that seemed like it could scale up pretty well once it had proof of concept, and that it was really close to proof of concept. And so that would actually really assist the movement to electric vehicles, because one of the constraints are, the batteries run on rare earth minerals, or need so many rare earth minerals. And also just that for us, the grid being able to power that many electric vehicles. But if we open the market to electric vehicles, we would have to figure out how to, generate more electricity, whether it's locally, with solar panels and things like that for electric cars, or in some other way really supplement the oil and gas industry and create smaller, more reliable grid systems to be able to run things, because I just don't see that we have the infrastructure for that in multiple ways.
Well, but that's part of the reason why it wouldn't surprise me if he did it, because, he's been saying that he doesn't care about the gas prices. And so, we only have 2 weeks on the U.S. strategic reserves. We only have 2 weeks left.
Yeah, I've been wondering, when that shock's going to hit.
Well, so if I wake up every morning surprised that 100,000 people haven't been annihilated by a nuclear weapon, and shocked that the global economy is not in depression, and I just think, okay, maybe we can.
I know, I just filled my cars up and I was like, okay, so, I'm full for now.
Right, exactly.
Let's see what happens. I get down a quarter of a tank and I fill back up, because I don't know. And we've got hybrids, so they get longer. They get, we can weather usually at least a month of, because we don't drive lots. But whether a month of, gas prices going up and down, but at some point you have to fill back up. So,
Can you
we
imagine
can,
what would happen? Can you imagine what would happen if prices shot up to $12 a gallon and
yeah.
we started importing Chinese EVs and we let them build out our electric, like the system to power those EVs and everything? If we did both things at the same time,
Yeah.
it would be amazing. Because like I said, I mean, a lot of the drill baby drill people would be shocked that Chinese EVs are actually very nice cars.
They're very nice.
So it wouldn't be one of those things where you're driving a car you don't like. You're actually driving a car you love for a really good price. It would destroy the U.S. auto market, but I mean, it would probably turn the economy around.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't be the first time
because that's one of those paradigm shift things. That's just one of those things that, like, we're all think we need to do oil and gas because we've been, trained that way. And then if all of a sudden, like, electricity was plentiful and it was cheap, and just like gas was 55 years ago or 60 years ago, I guess no longer than that, because that would have been the 70s. So back in the 50s, when gas was cheap and cars were gas guzzling, and everybody was like, there's no problem with gas prices. But if that did suddenly shift, it would be really interesting. That can be really disruptive, and I wouldn't want $12 diesel, and that would really complicate the agricultural situation. So hopefully there's different things for different things, but I think there's electric tractors and there's more and more electric trucks and all that kind of stuff coming out as well. So that could be. I mean, this whole thing, I've been thinking that, the whole Trump administration could be the fastest way to get from gas-powered vehicles to electric-powered vehicles.
That's
because, it's basically falling apart.
That's right. Well, I mean, that's true. That's true everywhere else but the U.S. But yeah, that's exactly right. So, I mean, and just the implications are amazing, because I watched a video of like Alberta's referendum to become a sovereign state and all this stuff.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Well, they've been talking about that. It's just interesting hearing people there. It's like this one lady was saying, I love Canada, but I just want our sovereignty. I mean, again, the whole, I don't believe in universal health care, but I don't touch my, my Medicare kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it would change politics in so many ways if we could like move off of the dependency from oil. It would just change so many things. But like I said, it wouldn't surprise me. It really wouldn't. Because again, if you want to talk about somebody who isn't ideological or idealistic, that's one thing you cannot say about Donald Trump. He is not idealistic. That's for sure. So, all right, well.
No. But he does have a definite worldview.
That's true. He has a worldview, but he doesn't have an ideology. That's right.
Right, but his whole worldview is we need to be back to the 1950s as he imagines it. That's like, and that, everything needs to support him. I mean, it's a pretty simple worldview.
Pretty simple. That's true. That is true. And I mean, I guess the last thing I will say, because I've mentioned them a couple of times, all of these market guys, a lot of them will say that they voted for Trump, and now they're really, really angry because they're just they just do not understand. They're like, I can't believe this. You've ruined this, for me, and ruined that for me, and blah, blah, blah. So,
if they let in Chinese EVs, I mean, that's a whole other new tearing apart of coalitions, it would be really
it would be very
thing.
disruptive in some interesting ways. Yeah, that's true. But I mean, we'll see. I don't know. Crazier things have happened. They're meeting for some reason, Why else would Xi Jinping be coming here? Like, what is he coming here to do? It's not like he loves America.
Well, I can imagine there's some screws that can be tightened with him coming here.
That's true. That's true. But like I said, I mean, don't be surprised if by the end of the year we're importing Chinese EVs and like those stations. They have these stations where you drive the car up and like they take the battery out the bottom. And they just put a new battery in, and it takes
that's an amazing technology.
Less than 3 minminutes.
Yeah.
And it looks very much like a Jiffy Lube. Have you ever been to Jiffy Lube or Wolverine or, because because the last time I went to one, it was sort of like, wait a second, so drive up. And I'm like, where are the guys? And they're below the car. It was the same sort of thing, except, it's all mechanical. It's all automated. So, yeah, we'll see. All right, well.
We'll see.
We sort of veered into a lot of different interesting topics.
We did. We didn't have any comments, so we needed to. Oh, we're already past time. I guess we did.
No, okay. I don't see any comments. I finally have the thing up, and No Anna Casper. So
All right.
maybe next
Very
time.
good. Okay, next time. And we'll have a whole new topic then.
Yep. See you, everybody.